Welcome to Sit Down News. Today I'm going to be speaking to you about my life and myself. I think that we all think about mistakes and wrong decisions that we've made in our past. And if we could go back, if we had the ability to go back, what would we tell a younger version of ourselves? What advice would we give? And unfortunately, we're not able to do that, but I do think of it all the time. And I try and think, if I did this, this wouldn't happen. I shouldn't have did this. You could beat yourself up, but it's good to try to reflect back and see where you went wrong and what mistakes you made. It helps you going forward. My story goes back to when I was born, and I am the product of two young kids having kids. My mother was 15 when she had me, and my father was 17. And back then, I know my grandparents were embarrassed of the fact that their young daughter was pregnant. And, with most marriages, these young marriages from with people that are that young usually don't last. And my father cheated on my mother, and that obviously that didn't help the marriage, and that's how the marriage ultimately ended. As a young toddler, I uh, I remember the incident vaguely. I remember certain aspects of this incident, like being put in a chair and made to sit in front of this wall unit, but I don't remember getting a beating or anything like that. And I don't know why I remember. I was very young. I remember being sit in front of um, my father's wall unit. I had to sit there. But so as a 2-year-old, we had plants in the house, and my mother was cooking or washing dishes. And I took the water bottle, a spray bottle, and I started spraying the plants. And I moved over to a wall unit that my father had. He loves music still to this day. And he had his turntable and all his records, and he had shelves for them. And he had a Sony reel to reel, and he was a big music guy. And not, being a 2-year-old, as I moved from the plants, I started spraying his equipment and albums. And he came home, and he gave me a beating for doing that. But I think he got a little out of hand, because he beat me so bad that my ears turned black and blue. My mother, in turn, packed me up and ran out, had an argument with him and ran out, and took us to a hotel. But an uncle of mine and my grandfather, excuse me, both convinced my mother to go back. You know, that's how it was back then. They told her, that's your husband, you got to go home and make amends. And she did. She recently told me that my doctor who delivered me advised her not to go back, but she listened to her family, and she went back. You know, I'm not making excuses for what my father did, but my father lost his mother at a very young age from cancer, and took that very hard, obviously. And his father, my grandfather, was a rough guy. He was very heavy-handed. He would beat them if he had to. And my father was also 19 at the time. He was a young guy, and I think he just lost his temper with me, and you know didn't realize what he was doing. But it's a pattern of behavior because of his father. But luckily, I kind of broke that pattern with my own kids. I don't hit them. Never hit them. there was a lot of arguments between my parents back then, and obvious from what was going on. It was cheating with my father, and there was a lot of arguing back and forth. And one of the things that, if I was able to speak to myself back then, you know, breakups don't start off good. And but over time, people usually are civil with each other. Unfortunately, for my mother and father, these arguments traveled, took place well into my adulthood. They just could not get along with each other, and there was a lot of animosity there. I remember going to school in Howard Beach, PS 146. It's in the older section, the old section of Howard Beach. There's the old side and the new side. I lived on both, but at this time we lived on the old side. And I would go to classmates' houses and after school and play with the kids after school. And I remember one day there was a classmate of mine, and he had walked home, passing my house, and he said, "Come on, let's go in your house." And I was so embarrassed. I didn't know how to answer him, because I was embarrassed over that my father didn't live with us, and I didn't want to divulge that, obviously. And I made up an excuse and said, "Well, my father's sleeping and he has to go to work, and we'll wake him up. We can't go in my house." And what I didn't know, obviously, back then, was I was not the only kid. Although it was rare back then, divorces were not common as they are today. I'm sure I wasn't the only kid who came from a broken home, but I wish I knew that then, but I did it. And because of my mother being so young, excuse me, so young, my grandparents took on a role as parents to me, not only grandparents, as parents. Specifically, my grandmother, I remember her doing everything for me. She helped out a lot. And I learned a lot from them. They were good people. They went to church all the time. My grandmother worked in a department store called A&S, and then she later worked in Macy's on Queens Boulevard. And I used to go see her there. And then even in my late teens, when I was driving, I used to go over and see her as well. And my grandfather worked in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and he was a supervisor of shipbuilding. But they were very good people. Even my father's family speak very highly of my grandparents, which are my mother's parents. They were respected by everybody. But they were good people, and they taught me a lot of good qualities. I spoke about where my grandfather used to tell me all the time, "John, please behave, be a good boy." My grandfather used to like to take the garbage out after we ate dinner. He didn't want no garbage in the house. And then he would go for his walk. He loved to walk, and he would tell me, "Come on, walk with me." Sometimes I would go, and sometimes I wouldn't want to go. I only wish I went those times now. They both have passed. And I wish I took more after my grandfather. I always say to myself, and I tell other people, if I was just half the man that he was, I would be okay in life. And unfortunately, he passed. He worked 41 years in that Brooklyn Navy Yard, and he never took a day off. They owed him years of vacation time, and he didn't even get to enjoy his retirement. He retired and passed away soon after. My grandfather stood away from the street and the mob life. He had a brother named Angelo who was an associate to the Gambino family. He was partners with Danny and Charlie Wagons Fatico. Those were the original they created the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club on Fulton and Rockaway in East New York, Brooklyn. I remember a time when I didn't write this in the blog, but I remember a time when I was by Our Lady of Grace, which is in Old Howard Beach, and I was on a baseball league. And I wasn't a great athlete. I was okay, so. But this particular day, and I had told my father that we were having this game. And this particular day, there was bases loaded, and I got up to bat, and I wind up probably by luck hitting a home run, which was a grand slam. And although I was happy to hit the home run, as I was running around the bases, like when I went to first, second, I was looking in the crowd. Everybody was clapping. And I was looking in the crowd to just see my father's face. My mother was working that day, but I wanted to see my father's face. And I wind up making it all the way to home and, obviously not seeing him. And he said he was busy and he couldn't make the game. I, I think that now looking back, what are you going to do? I should have been more concentrated and been more excited that I hit this home run and it was a grand slam for my team. We won the game. But I never got that out of my mind that he missed that game. And I speak about a flea market that was in our neighborhood. For those of you from Queens, the Aqueduct racetrack in the parking lot held the flea market. And we used to go there all the time, us young guys. And I remember, not that I didn't wear baseball hats, I did, but I remember one day specifically, I walked right past the baseball hats because I remember being there maybe the week before with my mother and seeing a stand that sold fedoras and a bunch of hats. And I went back and got my money and went to that stand and I bought a fedora hat. I was so proud to have that hat. And I used to wear it around. I was embarrassed to wear it outside the house, but I used to wear it in the house, and my family would always laugh at me when I wore it. Growing up in Bolt, Ozone Park, in Howard Beach, my father lived in Ozone Park and my mother lived in Howard Beach. But from my father's neighborhood, very close to our house was the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club. And for those of you who do not know what that is, the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club was headquarters to Johnny Gotti and their crew, the Gambino. They were part of the Gambino family. And at that time, John Gotti was a captain in the family. And we would see him around by the club and see him in the neighborhood and see the guys from the club, out and about, running around. And, like most, not all, but like most young men from our neighborhood, we began to idolize these guys. Back then it was very different. These guys were all dressed up in suits. They had fancy cars, watches, pinky rings, and whatnot. And, we idolized them. And I wrote, looking back now, obviously, I wish I never bought the fedora. I should have just bought a baseball hat, but we can't change the past. And, that's kind of advice that I would have gave myself if I was able to. And when you idolize something with somebody or a group of people, you try to be like them. You try to emulate them. And I remember one of my birthdays, and I'm not sure which one it was, where I was begging my mother and my godmother that I wanted a pinky ring. And they wind up getting it for me. And I would definitely admit to being very spoiled. And I kind of used the divorce. I played that game of pitting one parent against the other and the woe was me role. And, my mother spoiled me because she felt bad. Obviously, that happens with parents. Should they have bought me the ring? Probably not. Did they want to keep me happy? Yes. And I think I was just very confused back then, and I kind of held my emotions in. The divorce bothered me, and on the surface, I tried to act like a normal kid and everything was okay. But I mean, looking back now, I had a hard time dealing with it. I probably needed therapy. I showed a picture of me suntanning on my grandparents' roof. They lived in Howard Beach. And it's funny, that was kind of the style back then. We would wear our shorts over our sweatpants, which was kind of a crazy style. I put a picture up of the lovely post, and it shows John Gotti with the words life written across his face. And I wrote, what I failed to realize then was the fact that John Gotti should have been a lesson, a quintessential one. His rise to the top of the Gambino family resulted in his imprisonment for life and him dying shackled to a hospital bed. Terrible way to go. I personally think that if John Gotti would have chose another career in life, he would have went far. I think most of us, if we chose a different path, had the mentality to succeed in life. But I think that should have been a lesson for me. I remember coming out to breakfast when I don't remember, it wasn't then because I was already away when this happened, but it was, I think, when he got arrested for an assault shortly after he took the family over. And I went to my father's table, and he had all the different newspapers, the New York Post, garbage newspaper, the Daily News, Newsday, and whatever else he had. And he kind of laid them around the table to show me that they locked John Gotti up. He kept telling me, stay away from these guys, stay away from over there by that club, because this is the end result, this or that. And but this newspaper article or rather this newspaper picture of the front page, I was already away when this took place. And I speak about two mentors that I have written extensively about in my blog, Sit Down News. Johnny Santori and Tony Muscatello. Both, I wrote, unsuccessful in steering me away from the street. Although they were both involved in the life, both of them did not want that from me and tried to steer me away from that. And they also should have been lessons for me. Um, you know, if you could go back and reverse it and start over, obviously we would do things differently. But John passed away relatively young, which I spoke about in a blog. And obviously, Tony Muscatel is presently in a Florida prison, serving life to this day. Getting older, I posted a picture of him in one of my other blogs where he looks very old now. And I wrote that I wish they would have took their own advice. I think sometimes we all are good at giving advice, but not following our own advice. And that I'm guilty of myself. I wrote about a word, picciotto, and I remember that word from when I was young. I remember two of my friends their parents were from Sicily, and one of them, their father, one time called me that name, and I was proud that he called me that name. Looking back, I didn't realize that he was a working guy. I did not make a good impression with the parents of my friends. I was running around with a pinky ring and a watch and dressing up and you know, trying to act like, important. And I definitely was not. I think I was embarrassing myself more than anything back then. But I continued to idolize these people and you know, look up to them. Um, I wrote about the proverb, birds of a feather flock together. Very true statement. In any life, in that life, in civilian life, you always find that people just find each other somehow. And I met my friend, and who later turned out to be my co-defendant, Michael Ligori, at Blaze Carrazzo's social club. For those of you who do not know who Blaze is, he's a friend or a member of the Gambino family today. And Blaze gave Michael the nickname Mike the Boxer because Michael fought at one time in the Golden Gloves. He was a pretty decent fighter. And as soon as we met, we clicked and we started spending a lot of time together, going out drinking, hanging out together every day. And Michael was like the brother that I never had. And I still look at him this way today. I still worry and care about Michael. Michael, wherever you are, I hope you're okay. You know, I wrote about by 1989, this was obviously happening prior to 1989, but at that point, there was guys in the neighborhood, guys all over, all carrying pistols, and Michael and myself were no different. Um, you know, I said if I was capable to go back and change one of the decisions, it would be not to carry a gun, obviously. I wrote the probability of someone carrying a gun and using it in a time of trouble is extremely high, or extremely likely, as I wrote. And this was the case in 1989 when I got myself and Michael into trouble. Young man lost his life, and Michael and myself were incarcerated. I put an article that was in the Daily News. I redacted, which means I blacked out the name of the victim. I respect for the family of the victim. I use the word name Strand. I don't know if most people may know what that is, and some people won't. There's a lot of monikers that are given to inducted members in that life, Straightened Out, Wise Guy, and Strand was one that we would use amongst each other. And at some point, obviously after the trouble that Anthony Guzzo and myself got ourselves into in Brooklyn, I reconnected with my childhood friend, Joey DiBenedetto. Joey is another member of the Lucchese family, and he was my childhood friend. And as a result of that reconnection, over time, I wind up getting inducted myself into the Lucchese family. And I speak about foresight. I know I spoke about hindsight, looking back, but I speak about foresight. And I say I had not an inkling of foresight whatsoever. True statement. You know, sometimes we just don't think about our actions or decisions that we make. And I wrote the words, "What were you thinking?" often come to mind. I kind of say that on a daily basis sometimes. I try not to beat myself up, but sometimes a little self-beating helps in the process of trying to make better yourself. And I speak about being warned, and I spoke about this a lot. I was warned by several people, and this is coming home from being incarcerated in 2007 of June. There was a couple of people, and one or two were friends, who warned me and told me, John, keep your distance, stay away. This life's over. It's not the way it was back then, whatever you knew before you went away and whatnot. But, you know, sometimes we just don't listen. We have to learn for ourselves. I also wrote, if I could tell a young, gullible young man anything, it would be two words, specifically me as a young man. It would be listen and think. And a lot of times, if you just stop, you listen to good advice and you think about it, you have to think. Maybe you might change your mind on making bad decisions and bad mistakes. I unfortunately had to learn the hard way, and you know, that's life. Sometimes you have to make mistakes, learn from them. The important thing is if you could turn mistakes into lessons. I'm not saying they were worth it, but it doesn't just stay as a mistake. So I think that if you come away with a lesson, you're okay. You know, we could all finish differently. You know, you could go through life and make mistakes and wrong decisions, some not as bad as mine, but how you finish up and how you finish the race is really what counts. It's just like these college kids. I've heard some of them go to community college, but then they'll pick a a big name college to end, you know, their education in, and that's the part that counts for them. If you have not subscribed to Sit Down News, subscribe down below. I hope everybody's enjoying your Saturday. I'm gonna go enjoy the rest of mine. Ciao.